Hello, and welcome back to Starlight Talks. This week I'm with Adam Walch, who I'm going to call Mr. Walch because he's my teacher.
Move that over because you can't see it.
You're going to call me that when you're 70?
Yes.
I hope
so.
Okay, producer Gail's going to fix something. Sorry.
Okay.
you have a problem. Okay?
We're also on Instagram Live this time. So if you can't get on here, go on Instagram.
OurTism, OUR.tism, TISM on Instagram.
Don't feel free to check out the website, OurTism.com, where you can check out our Life Map program, our support groups, and we just started a parent support group that's meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock at the office, 2108 Vale Avenue, Redondo Beach, 7 to 9 o'clock is the parent support group, and then the following, which means every other week, will be the adult support group. Same time, same place. And then also on the website, you can check out more of my articles. So please comment and ask questions, and we'll get to them and try to answer as many as we can.
You forgive me. I'm like an audience member. I haven't seen her do this before, and I'm very impressed.
So, Mr. Walch was my teacher in 7th and 8th grade, but he taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I transferred in the middle of the year, and he taught a special needs class of about 6 students, and we all learned how to use our disability to our advantage.
Well said.
Yeah, he was really good at teaching all time management, study skills, test taking, all that stuff.
All that necessary stuff?
Yeah. Very necessary. And so I thought you could start by talking about moments because that influenced everything that you taught.
That's very sweet of you to say. That's very, very kind. Well, wow, where to start with moments?
I remember.
Tell me what you remember about my introduction.
The first time you taught it to me, I don't know if the rest of the class, Lila was looking out the window in the after school program, and the sun was setting, and it was reflecting off these buildings. She thought it was really cool, and you made everyone stop what they're doing and go outside and look at it, and you were like, you need to remember this moment, do whatever you can to remember this moment. You told us all about moments right there. It was like time goes by really fast, and you need to slow it down as much as you can by saving as many moments as you can.
It's very touching to me that you remember so well that particular moment.
Yeah.
And you also encapsulated the philosophy very well. That's pretty much it. Thanks. Next. No, I never intended that to be a big part of my support or my involvement with the kids with whom I work, but it has been. It's become that. And it's just it's a very simple concept that we think of time as a continuum. We think of time as starting, middle, and end. And it's not. It's really just a collection of moments, and how we cherish those moments and how we remember those moments and how we appreciate those moments is how we measure and appreciate life. And I think that's as important a lesson to you guys as anything else you were learning on that particular afternoon. And as you say, when I see a kid who's distracted with something, rather than automatically redirect them, I might sense if maybe they need something to memorize beyond the curriculum at that moment. And Lila looking out the window on that long ago afternoon must have struck me as important. And I guess it was a sunset, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the sun used to set and shine off the windows downtown. And that was very dramatic. Whatever the case, a moment is more important if it's memorized and then remembered. It's more important than anything I could have taught you to do with your classwork. And I've constructed my life that way. And the fact that that lesson has been well learned by you, and maybe you construct your life that way too, is very touching. Very nice of you to say. Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
When's the last moment you had where you
Oh,
stopped and said, "I'm going to memorize this. I'm going to remember this"?
what's the last one?
Turning the table.
Earlier today, Benji was sleeping in the office, and he's just like, he always does such cute things, and I had to take a picture of it and like
That's
remember
great.
that. I take a lot of pictures of Benji to remember
A lot of
places.
your moments are Benji related.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just doing work and I looked down and he was just so cute.
You had to memorize.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think that's great. It's a perfect moment. And I'm glad that you have had one today. You should have one every day. That's terrific.
Yeah. Well, what Danny Rady, who was on last week, talks about is the environment is really important. Where based on your environment, you're going to feel different ways. And so you should set up your environment to create a beneficial space in your classroom. Really showed moments because you put up all the photographs all over the room. It was every inch of the wall.
Every inch of the walls
was covered in your teaching.
And, you know, when I left that particular school, I know you were involved. A bunch of the kids took all of the photographs down and put them in a whole series of huge photo albums for me. So I still have them.
I remember you saying, I don't know what to do with all these photos. Like anyone that wants them can take them. And I was like,
that's our life. You can't give it away. But that, you know, it was kind of dramatic leaving at that point. And those photos belonged to all you guys. And there were years of kids on those walls. Of course. It was fun to make our time that way. We're on TV. Sorry. Do you remember taking them down and putting them in the photo albums for me? So I've got those moments forever. I remember some of the pictures that I had of you too. I think one of you reading. I think that was our very first connection when I recognized that you really enjoyed reading. That was very important. Are you bringing up the concept of environment because you'd like me to comment on that, or that particular classroom, or? Yeah,
you can comment on it.
It is really important. It's everything, and an environment that's not only conducive to, you know, in my case, schoolwork and what you're working on, but also just really, really comfortable. And I don't know if you remember, we had to have desks, obviously, and computers, but the most important part of the room for me was I didn't want any other furniture except pillows. I learned that from a 5th grade teacher of mine, believe it or not. And I loved the thought that for 1 hour in your school day, you kids could come in and not have to sit at a desk and not have your attention have to be directed towards a teacher in front of you at a blackboard or whatever the case may be. I love that you could flop down on the pillows, socialize for a little while.
Yeah, I love like the bean bags and doing my work on the bean bags. And like normally I actually sit on the floor or on my bed somewhere, so it was like really natural to do it there rather than at a desk. And to have like be able to have all these papers in front of me and books and stuff.
And then that worked out. Huh?
Yeah.
Environment is
so it was, yeah.
Those photographs, that was an accident, a very happy accident. But yeah, I was at that particular location for so long, and I was collecting photographs for so many years. What better way than to, it was so much fun also when my former students who would come back frequently to visit, if you remember, the first thing they'd want to do is find the photographs of them on the wall. Say, oh, look at me when I was 11. What happened? What else to do? want to talk about? What else do you remember or would like me to?
And we were talking about a special place that was really important that we all had a special place.
Well, I want to reiterate how touching it is to me that these lessons were well learned by you and that you remember them. It was never my intention really with all of these, certainly not gimmicks, but all of these little concepts in my teaching that, I was trying to teach you guys the lessons therein, but the fact that you remember them so well is very touching. SP is what we called it, right? And if memory serves, it stood originally for special place, but then over the years it kind of metamorphosed into secret place, and the kids like that better. And it's very simply the concept that I wanted all of my kids to have one place that was theirs only, and it couldn't be the bedroom. Their own bedroom already is invaded by so many other daily things. I wanted it to be someplace quiet, conducive, as your last guest talked about, to a peacefulness and a calmness. I always would suggest someplace outside, but it certainly didn't have to be. And it was a place that you could go, that was just yours. You could do anything you wanted there. You were left alone there. No one could invade that space, and you weren't supposed to tell anyone, if I remember correctly. I journal with all my kids. I believe we journal too, and I would ask them to find a place, establish a place that was their SP, and do their journaling there. And that really worked out. And once again, this is no brilliant concept. People already have that concept in their lives all the time. And when I was young, I certainly had my getaway places. As a young woman, just not too long ago, I took you to one of my childhood SPs, which is right up the street.
Castle.
Yeah. Which I drove by on the way here. It's still very important to me, very special. Do you still have an SP?
Yes.
I want to ask you what you did there, because that's the whole point.
When I was little, I would go to my SP, and my little sister kept asking where I was going, and I kept telling her nowhere.
Perfect.
And then she found out where it was, and she thought that place was called Nowhere.
It was like a Beatles song.
And she wanted to come with me. And so over this one summer, every week we would go have a picnic in Nowhere.
Oh, that's fantastic. You never told me that. This is the test?
Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, I had the honor of not only working with Chloe for many years, but I did also work with her younger sister, Tess. And neither one of them ever volunteered that story. That's great. Nowhere. What other things do you remember, or is there anything, specifically to do with this presentation that I am so proud of you for doing, incidentally, that harkens back to our experiences together?
Well, for me, planning and scheduling was like a very hard thing for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm a very visual person, and so it was really hard for me to remember to do projects. And I tried so many different things. People were like, do a to-do list, do all these things. And what you had us do is put in our calendar the due date of the project and highlight it back. And so I could visually see this is how much time I had to do this project. Mm-hmm. And so I could start working on it. And so I started working on it way earlier than I would have if I didn't have that visually in front of me. And so
a daily reminder.
Yeah. And then you had it like the checklist on the whiteboard that was super useful to look at, and we prioritized it.
So happy
and we
prioritized
it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I've got to get this done first. And
pick which one's first.
Yeah. And so that was really helpful to have like the visual to look at and go, okay, this is what I've done and this is what I need to do. I'm
honored that my dumb little systems were so effective. you brought up that the whiteboard and a daily planner, and we had a couple of other what are called redundant systems where you're doing the same thing here, here. And actually that's really important for the LD community, whatever that is. That repetitive nature of organizational skills really ingrains it when otherwise it would just be another task. If you're doing something 3 times in 20 minutes, by the 3rd time it's much more organized. And that's still essential to the kids with whom I work is that structural stuff and the repetitive nature of that structural stuff. I still have planners that I highlight through. It's harder to do than when you were little because the kids don't even know what a planner is now. They don't, you and I are both visual. Their entire sense of school outside of school is what they receive on their phone. And so my battle as an educational therapist is to get them to go old school and take what they're looking at on their phone and get it into a planner, get it into some sort of calendar. That's a new challenge for an old dog like me.
And then especially, I don't know if you know about defense mode, but that's something that Danny Rainey talked about, was on last week. And when I was working with you, I was definitely deep in defense mode. And one of the things that does is it changes your perception of time, where it's really hard to see the consequences of in the future.
Interesting, yeah.
And so you're very in the now. And so a lot of people in that state of mind have a really hard time with the calendar. And so it's easier to break it down weekly rather than this, you have it on this future day that doesn't exist.
Trust me.
Or even daily, and you did all of that. You were like, here's the monthly schedule, here's the weekly schedule, here's the daily schedule. So if you could pick the one that works for you.
You nailed it. That's exactly right.
And so if you can take that much time and comprehend it, you can do it. But if you needed like just today, you had like the future projects, like, okay, work on it 30 minutes today. And it was then a homework assignment instead of work on this project at some point.
I just have a thought. It's probably not the first time I've expressed it. I very selfishly hope you do what I do someday, because you just nailed that completely, that you're exactly right. The logic of it, the rationale, the purpose of it. There are kids, and yes, I do know about defense mode, but that's an interesting way of putting it, to where that will manifest in, next week is a foreign planet, please don't address that with me. I'm not going to address it with you. Some kids will need this afternoon cubed up. What am I doing from 4 to 5? What am I doing from 5 to 6? Some kids need, all right, what does the next week look like? What does tomorrow look like? It's funny what each of the students needs, what each of the kids' needs are. Tailor making their education.
After being in RTE, we had like a scheduled class time where we did homework. And so I was in college, I didn't have that. So I like put in my calendar, at this time on this day, I'm doing homework. And it felt weird if I didn't have homework and wasn't there doing it, because it was like a class that I had to attend. I made sure,
but that's what I wanted.
Yes. It was not in my dorm room, that it was either in the library. And like my first two semesters, I had a mentor I actually met with, and they held me accountable. So like I had someone to go to, and even though I didn't necessarily have to get future projects done, she'd be like, hey, so what'd you get done? And if I was like, nothing, I would feel bad. So I'd get stuff done so that I could impress her.
I think I remember you mentioning it.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're implementing that system on your own as a college student shows that I'm sure that wasn't too much of a problem. You already had all the advantages. And you've always been very studious too, so you were motivated. I remember, you mentioned that you came in 7th grade, I had forgotten that. I remembered that I pulled some strings, your mom and I, to get you into that
Yeah.
class. There were other people that were supposed to supersede you, but you were just such an ideal candidate because you were kind of in that defense mode. You were. It's not that you weren't being well served, but you were being misunderstood.
Yeah.
And wanted to get you into an environment with some other kids that you could. You were part of not only the system, but that little group. And that was very important to me too, that you guys got along real well. I don't know if you ever knew this, if I ever told you, but I would sometimes even leave the room, but I would deliberately look as if I was disengaged because I wanted to eavesdrop and kind of passively oversee you guys bonding and congealing as a group, the 6 of you. And maybe we should mention that you guys continued to get together for some years.
Yeah.
Thereafter. They were a great group. She was a real good student.
And you called it the RTE family. We were brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
which like that in itself was really nice. And I think it's important what labels you choose to put on someone relationship wise. And so that like made it easy to be a family and support each other
That's nice.
when you put that on.
Well, and you know, it really was. I agree with you. It really was. And not only with the 6 of you in that particular grade, but one of my favorites is, again, when old alums would come back, you know, sometimes well into their 20s and so forth. And I would say, this is your RTE big sister.
Yeah.
And I would have them share their memories of that classroom and their experience. And you know what? I just ran into one of my very first students yesterday, and we found time to have coffee together. And he just had his first baby and so forth. And he is still in touch with those friends that he made in RTE in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They're all dispersed around the country now, but they still chat all the time. And that's ideal. I love that. I absolutely love that. It's important. You brought up labels.
Yeah.
What do you think about the concept of label?
I don't like how many there are, and like a lot of labels I feel like are like way too simplified. But I think there are also some. They're such a useful tool in explaining, like, I have autism and your relationship with someone, whether it's a girlfriend, a friend, a family member, that kind of thing. But it's also important that you define those labels when you present them instead of assuming what the other person understands.
Beautifully said. You're so right. I completely agree with you. It's a necessary commodity of what I do for a living, but I do my best to avoid them, do my best to blow them up. You know, your particular diagnosis, you came to me, obviously was autism, but all my kids have different diagnoses.
No, I was misdiagnosed
That's right.
when I was in your class.
That's
I had
right.
ADD and OCD.
That's right. It wasn't just, I remember that glorious development later on. You're right. But my only point is this, that you know, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for 35 years, and it took me a real long time to realize that the testing is important. The diagnosis is important. Reading all of the recommendations and the stipulations and the specifics of that particular learning style is important. But then once you get to know the kid, it could not matter less to me. I taught you. I didn't teach your diagnosis. And that sounds like, you know, that's a little bit, I don't know, like pablum, you know, that teach the individual, but it's so true. All of these diagnoses are just differences. And that's not just a politically correct term. It's just a different way of learning and a different way of viewing the world, and get to know the individual. And it doesn't matter what that is, what that label is. You get to know how they see the world. and how they learn best. And like I said, initially, I recognized that you learn best through reading. That's how we first bonded. Was books.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kind of went off.
You gave me a quote book with like the first page was like about the moments.
Oh, to write your quotes. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Because I had one of those. Yeah. And you always came up with really intelligent and interesting insights, and I wanted you to record them. Did you? Were you happy about joining RTE?
I was so happy.
Yeah.
I actually said that.
Someone asked just to explain what RTE is, just
Yeah.
for people that don't.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm going to be a little bit evasive here because
Of course.
it involves some a program that is still ongoing,
Sort of.
which I've sort of a manifestation of a program that I started at a local school, and it stood for Road to Excellence. This was just a silly name we came up with, and it was an academic support class for children with what was then called learning disabilities, and they would be pulled out by me into another classroom on the campus and given general structure and general support in the rest of their classes, because they were being asked to maintain the very vigorous standards of this particular school's curriculum despite their learning difference. And so this was a way to get them an hour a day where they could decompress and restructure their approach to their classwork. And we called it RTE, and I left it. I don't even remember when I left, they've altered the program and renamed it. Hope that explains things.
So before that, when I was at the public school, me and my mom would like study for hours and hours and hours for tests, and I kept taking these tests and being so confident that I got it, and I get back the grade, and it wasn't even like I missed some of them. Like I got a failing grade.
Yeah.
And I was like so frustrated. I didn't know what was going on. My teachers were all trying to work with me, and and all of them were like, "You can come over during recess." I'm like, "But I can't come to all of you during recess. I also need my recess to decompress."
So brilliant. Exactly.
And so it was just like this endless cycle.
And mystifying.
And I was just like, "But I got A's through elementary school. I don't know what happened. I'm doing the same thing I always did." And so I came home and with a math test, and I didn't even want to talk about it, and I didn't show it to my mom, and she came in my bedroom, and I was like working on my homework, and she was like, "So how did your test go?" And I just burst into tears, and she was like, "We didn't do something different." And Lillian was already attending the school that you were teaching at, and she was like, "You need to come check out the school because I think it has everything that you need that this school isn't doing." And I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. And I was so sure I wasn't gonna like it, and so
Oh, really?
yeah,
I didn't remember that.
and I ended up looking at she was in the sister school, and I ended up looking at your school for some reason. I think because I didn't have a diagnosis yet. I was like in the process of getting it, so I couldn't get into her school. And you approached me and were like, come talk to me. I was like there for like an art thing. And
did I snag it?
Yeah, and you were like, "You need to come and you need to shadow a student in my class." And I don't even remember what we talked about, but you were just like, I think it was like books or something.
Probably. That was our first bonding thing.
And then I came and I shadowed, and after, like, the regular classes were okay, but after I was in your class, I went to my mom and said, "I want to come to the school if I can be in that RTE." And she was like, "Oh my I don't think that's gonna happen. And so
They only had
she
6
called
kids.
the school, and she was like, "Is there any way my daughter can be an RT? I know there's only 6 students." And she's like, "Well, this is crazy because Mr. Walsh already said if Chloe wants to come here, I want her in RTE." And it was like, and I like really believe like everything happens for a reason.
I agree.
And so like my life is like full of these coincidences like that where it's like, well, I want to do this, and then someone's like, yes, you should do this, like some sign telling me to do this. Like I feel like there's all these
A
signs
beautiful thought.
telling me to do OurTism and that this is what I'm supposed to do. And so like everyone's like, are you nervous about the transition to school? It's like, no, not at all. And I really wasn't.
You weren't. I think you, back then, I don't know if this is still the case, but I think you were often mistaken for timid when you were anything but.
No.
You were the bravest, strongest kid in that class.
I've talked about this on here, but I had what I believe is selective mutism, where when I'm in an environment with like way too much going on, there's too much to process that I'm not able to communicate, to add like another process to it. So like when I'm at a party or when it's a big group of people at a restaurant, I have a much harder time communicating, and school is just that 24/7.
Sure it is, yeah.
Where when I'm one-on-one with someone, I talk a lot. Like as you can tell, I do this live stream for a full hour and I can talk. But when I'm in a party setting or a school setting, I lose that ability. And so people think quiet people are shy and timid and don't have anything to say. And like quiet is so different from shy. Shy is like, I am afraid to talk. I'm afraid of rejection. And some shy people actually talk a lot. But quiet people is a very different. It's like sometimes some of them don't want to talk. They're just like, that's not part of who they are. But for me, it was like an inability to talk.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's like taking an opera singer and saying, okay, you're going to be the star of a movie, now act.
Yeah.
Listening to you, 2 thoughts occur to me, if I may. One is, I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know if I ever told you this story. When you were little, early on in your experience in my class, you came in, I wouldn't say distraught, but perplexed with an engagement you had just had with one of your peers.
Oh.
And it was a boy who, I wonder after I told you this story, if you remember which boy this was. He had been mean to you and had been teasing you and had been using some language that you really didn't even understand. And you asked me, what does this word mean? And what did he mean when he did that? And
I don't remember this at all.
Don't you? I don't want you to say the name, but it was, no, never mind.
No, you can tell us after.
I'll tell you. I sat down with you and I thought, okay, this is going to be a moment where I'm going to have to address bullying and the emotional reaction and what that child meant by doing it and how you should respond and all of these, rote memory therapeutic interventions that I was preparing to go through with you.
I don't know if I blocked out a lot of
Well,
bullying,
I'll tell you what,
or I misinterpreted bullying because I don't remember
you're stealing my punchline. You're stealing my punchline, because that's exactly it. I was completely mistaken. After I explained what the words meant and so forth, you were so unfazed. You were like, I was already like, and it's okay, it's not your fault. And and you were like, oh, that's really stupid. and that was the end of it. And I said, you're right, that really was stupid. And he said, can we do some homework? It was done. It was over. And that particular peer, I think, sought you out because he saw you as quiet and timid. And little did he know that he was trying to pick on a lioness. I
remember in the school I went to before, there was an older classmate, like I was in 6th grade, she was in 8th grade, and she called me and my sister twin 1 and twin 2. And like looking back, I'm so sure she was trying to bully us. And I thought she was my friend. And I remember when she got the numbers mixed up, I'd be like, no, I'm twin 1.
You know how beautiful that is? Talk about disarming her. That's great.
I'm sure she was so baffled, but I'd approach her and be like, hey, I remember you.
When she got it wrong, you'd correct her. You're not bullying me correctly.
Yeah. And like looking back, I'm so sure she was trying to bully me.
Oh, yeah,
and I was just
probably.
But in the moment, she was my friend. I was so happy to have like an upperclassman friend then. And I told everyone she was my friend.
Which further disarmed her, I'm sure. The other thing I was going to comment about what you were talking about earlier, I love the way you look at your life, you know, that everything happens for a reason in every chapter. And I have always thought, again, I'm beating the reading analogy to death, but I always thought of your life as a book. And, you know, I was lucky enough to be one of the earlier chapters, but you've had so many chapters since, and you kind of walk through your life and view your life like it's a slowly revelatory, good piece of fiction. And you're always excited for what the next chapter is going to be and so forth. And I've always admired that. So good for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know how to comment on
it. I've admired it from afar with you for a long, long time.
Thank you.
I have a lot of really good memories of that program, that class, your class in particular. I consider myself immeasurably fortunate that I am still in touch with so many of my ex-students. I have, you know, we talked about journaling. I have students, God bless, I'm thinking of one in particular who's now married and living in Boston, and we still send the journal back and forth a couple times a month. It's very important to me. You know, when I'm meeting a new family or a new student, I use it, again, a label that I'm a rapport-based educator, rapport-based therapist. And those are just words, but it's just really important for me to get to know my kids really extremely well and build a solid rapport with them. That's how I'm effective. It's no other trick at all. That's the only reason I'm effective. And knowing you guys into your young adulthood and beyond is terribly important to me. And probably the biggest, not to overstate it, but the biggest honor of my life is that I get to, even when I'm done working with you, I still get to know you guys and watch you blossom, watch you succeed, watch you achieve. So in other words, don't blow me off. I want to know you for the next 20 years.
I don't know why this memory just popped into my head, but I remember Lillian would come into our after school class just randomly. She'd just pop in and be like, I'm here today. And I remember you told her that she was an honorary RTE member, and I got so mad because
No, you're not.
I mean, I still have a huge individuality complex due to being a twin, sure. But it was even bigger then, where I would get mad at her for like wearing my clothes and like trying to copy me. And so I was like, no, you're the Renaissance, I'm RT.
I was like pushing her out the door. That was surprisingly common though, if you remember. Kids know a lot better than their teachers or even their parents when they need a certain kind of support or something. And there would always be kids hanging around that classroom, kind of loitering around, wanting to be included. You know, ideally, sorry, I know it's your twin sister, but ideally that would have been a good place for her occasionally. Yeah. You know, you bring up those memories. This has absolutely nothing to do with your presentation. I apologize for digressing, but I think one of my favorite stories with your group was Connor There was one boy in her group that every time I looked up, instead of doing his work, he was staring. And I don't mean occasionally. I mean, it was a constant redirection. Connor, please stop staring at your teacher and attend to your work. He's still like that. He's another one that I still know.
But you handled that so well, because I know teachers that would get so mad about that and just handle it so wrong and insult him. I don't know, probably accidentally, but they would just say things where you would just be like, oh, Connor, just stop.
Well, I tried staring back. That didn't work.
You just that's him, and
That's-
it's something
well,
he
that's
has to do, and
Well said.
and you're
Well said.
well, you should probably do your work because that's probably more beneficial than staring at me the whole class. Is how you approached it, instead of well, I'm gonna call your mom if you don't stop doing it, or I'm gonna take you out of the classroom, or I'm gonna punish you. You were always so supportive of
that's very kind
the
of you.
things we had to do.
Though, and that's also
Yeah.
eloquently put, the things we had to do.
Yeah.
Connor wasn't trying to be a wise guy. He was
No.
just something. He wanted to stare at Mr. Walch for 10 minutes. Well, as I say, that's very kind words. Don't ever underestimate, in that kind of a context, the importance of a sense of humor. That was funny. It's very funny that every time I looked up, he's staring at me. And making a joke out of it became a joke for our little group to share. That Connor would stare at people.
At the end of each year, I gave my favorite teachers this painting of Goofy, and I think you were the first one I gave one.
Really?
Yeah.
I still have it up, of course.
Yeah, and my friends started calling it the Goofy Award, and they started asking who's gonna get
the Goofy Award? Is that still going on? Do your professors still get the Goofy Award?
No, who's the last one that got it? I'm gonna call them out.
Have you discussed your passion with Goofy as a character? Because that was certainly instrumental in our relationship. Goofy was very important to us.
Yeah.
She likes Goofy.
Yeah. In 7th grade, I had a birthday at Goofy's kitchen, and I asked him to marry me.
You were dead
We
serious.
danced the Macarena, and that's our song. And yeah,
I still have fever nights thinking about it.
And my grandma still calls him my first love. It's a huge part of my life. Goofy was really important to me. And so
He really was.
yeah. I drew these Goofies in my notebook, and I remember you were oh, you should count them up, and there was something where you were I bet you can't draw this many Goofies by the end of the year.
Oh my god!
And I
remember that.
And I ended up drawing.
That was the biggest mistake.
It was
I ever made.
142 something random, and I drew them. And another guy in the RT class counted all of them and tallied them on the whiteboard. And in a month, I drew 100
I do
and
remember that now.
something Goofies.
Well, it's funny, and like I said, it's important to have a sense of humor. But your, I don't want to say obsession, your predilection towards all things goofy is very common in young people. Girls sometimes really go through a horse phase. Boys, I went through a dinosaur thing where I was just obsessed, and everything dinosaur was absolutely integral, fascinating, and important, more important than anything else. And so it's almost it doesn't do it service to say that you had a crush on Goofy. It wasn't just that. It was you just really were passionate about that one particular icon. I got that. Should have never challenged you to draw 1,000 of them. But you were an excellent artist too. Still are, I'm sure. Do you still draw?
Not as much because I'm doing film and photography, and so there's writing, and so that's one of the things. Like I ended up having to prioritize what I spend my time on, and that ended up not being part of
One of the priorities.
But I
return to it in the future.
yeah, but I'll doodle what when I'm bored. I just we're talking to
Does
someone.
Goofy ever show up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that particular passion of yours. I thought Goofy was great, and it's surprising how many kids have something like that.
And special interest is something I want to cover as a topic, but to quickly go over it, I think it's like a safety net for a lot of kids where if they're afraid to talk about something really, really personal, they'll talk about a special interest. And if they feel like people don't judge them for that and they feel safe in that topic, then they'll move on to a more personal subject. And for me, that was books and
Wow.
Goofy. Like I wore Goofy shirts and like I brought books with me everywhere. It was like a shield. Like I hugged
You totally
books.
get it. I completely agree with you. Again, professionally, therapeutically, and also just on an instinctual level, you're absolutely right. It's a way to access other areas.
And so when you would talk about Goofy and my books with me, then I was like comfortable and opening up.
Yeah. Well, there's no trick to that. And it wasn't a trick. It wasn't, I'm going to talk about, I'm wringing my hand thinking, how can I get her to open? I'll pretend I'm interested in Goofy. I thought it was real cool that you liked Goofy. So that was something for us to talk about. And like I said, very common. So common, as a matter of fact, that sometimes when I get a kid who doesn't have any particular passion like that, that becomes...
we got to find it.
Yeah, exactly. Or we got to not find it, but let's, hey, Biff. Biff anymore. Let's develop a passion. Let's find something. You know, that's funny. I was texting with one of my old students who's now an educator, and she texted me a problem she's having, behavioral problem in class, and asking my advice. And I texted her back, and I said, well, you should just say, quote, now look, Billy, you shouldn't and gave her the advice. And then there was no response and no response. And I was like, she must not have liked my counselor. And then she just texted me back, blah, Billy. No one has named Billy. No one's been named Billy since 1966. And I had no idea, but I was demonstrating how old I am.
I have a friend named Billy.
Do you?
Yes.
Billy, I'm glad that there is still somebody. But she thought that was very funny that my lesson involved.
I think his name's William, but he goes by Billy.
Good for him. At least I didn't say Millicent. Anyway, that's an aside. I apologize.
That's Tess's middle name.
Is it? Sorry, Tess.
It was almost my name.
It is? It's a cool name, but come on. That's definitely old school.
It was
Millicent.
my mom's grandma was Lillian,
Tell
and
me,
then my dad's grandma was Millicent, and me and Lillian were going to be Lillian and Millicent. And they were like, oh, but we don't want them to be Lily and Millie.
Well, of course, yeah.
So I ended up being Chloe, and then Tess got the Millicent as her middle name.
Well, please tell your sister that I was teasing her middle name without knowing it. What else?
Okay, producer back here again. I know you always hear this voice off the camera. Adam, you've touched on something that we talk about a lot in OurTism is trust. And in RTE and in your private practice, I mean, that is truly what was your road to excellence.
Thank you.
And success with your students. Really, that's
very nice.
Because without it, this population, especially with an autism profile, Asperger profile, feeling safe and building trust is where it has to start with everything.
Yeah. Much like your daughter, you've said everything. You're absolutely right. It's a particular student population that have learned mistrust before they've learned trust, with good reason. And, I referred before to rapport. I don't expect them to trust me. I expect to earn their trust and prove that it can be given. And that's what I mean by rapport. Mm-hmm. And yeah, everything is built on that. Everything is built on that. I think, unfortunately, in the general population, even there's so many students have a me versus them mentality, and so many teachers unfortunately have the exact same
ways,
thing.
Right?
Yeah. I never understood why teachers, for example, on their free time gravitate together. Why aren't they spending their free time? That it does go both ways, and I think that for most young people, there's teachers they like, there's classes they like, there's some things that interest them in their curriculum, but there's very few times in their education where they really trust one of their teachers, one of their educators. And that educator has no idea what they are missing, because once you have their trust, you have an open mind. But I didn't say it as well as you did. Yeah.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Oh yeah. I didn't have a favorite subject that was consistent, because everyone asked what was your favorite subject, and it was like always based on the teacher, not like the actual content. Mm-hmm. It was like I liked the teacher rather than I liked the subject. That was always like really important to me, is having like a teacher that created a safe enough environment that I felt comfortable learning. Because learning can be really vulnerable, because you can feel stupid if it's done incorrectly.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Where you should never feel stupid when you're learning something new and getting it wrong. That's like part of learning.
Absolutely right.
And so like I didn't understand like the popcorn learning style of like answer this question. It's like then you just had anxiety of am I gonna get it right rather than am I getting this
learning and getting this more
information.
Then add being slow processor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I remember even in college explaining slow processing to my professor, and then still going, but you still need the participation point, so you're not going to pass the class. I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to pass.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you now.
So I just explained to you how this works. I'm not going to just all of a sudden have the answer.
You saying that. Oh, I'm over it now. Okay. Well, you're entirely right. I've said my whole career, there's two types of educators. Two types of good educators. One who loves what they're teaching. And every kid, I hope, would come across a handful of those who's just passionate and involved and invested in English or physics or whatever the case. And then the other type of really effective teacher is the kind of teacher who loves the people they're teaching. The curriculum is important, obviously, but they really want to establish that trust that your mom was talking about, and establish that relationship, and knows that they can change that young person's life by establishing that relationship and then teaching them. The best kind of educator is the one who can combine those two. If you get one of those, hang on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're very articulate in discussing all this stuff. You understand it real well. I'm impressed. I'm always impressed.
Thank you.
What else? I'm happy to answer any questions or tell you I'm honored that you asked me to be here. I'm still a little mystified as to what.
Because you're a big part of like why I'm able to do this.
Thank you. That's made me cry.
Yeah, and I want to share that because this is what everyone's asking: is how are you able to do the things you're doing? And like it's because of your lessons. It's because of RTE.
That's very gracious of you to say. Thank you. There's nothing that special. You were very, very easy to teach.
I wanted to learn. Yeah. I just had teachers that didn't like to teach me.
Well, and we bring up that anxiety. That was another big part of that program, was yanking them out of that what was a very anxious world for these kids. Maybe, I don't know if, I'm sure you're aware of this, but it's something interesting to discuss is the fact that when I was young, none of these diagnoses, few of them existed, and none of them were really well understood. And I was a very, very troubled kid academically. I was a very poor student and was put in all kinds of special classes because I had, he's so bright, but his grades are so bad. And I was troublesome to all of my teachers growing up because they couldn't figure out why I did so poorly in school. And by the time I'm in college, and I realized that these diagnoses, again, as I say, these what they call disabilities then, were me. That was me. And so it became just a very logical decision for me to pursue finding the kids who were like me and working with them and teaching them. So when you say those gracious things, you should know that if I was effective with you, it's just because I was treating you because I knew you were me. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's very hippy-dippy.
I get that because I see myself in a lot of I haven't met a lot of the kids, but as parents will like talk about their kids, I'm like, that's me.
Yeah. At some element or other. Yeah.
And I'll just be like, well, here's why I did it. I don't know why they're doing it. And they're like, that's probably why they're doing it. And then they like come back to me and they're like, my kid told me that's exactly why they're doing it. They didn't even know that was why they were doing it until you.
How about that?
I was like, well, that's great.
Once again, and you've articulated my point perfectly. That's exactly what I was talking about.
And like, I thought my story was so unique, but it's not. It's like really universal. How even neurotypical kids go through what I've gone through and can relate to different things.
That's
that I talk about.
It sounds like a paradox. It's something your uniqueness can also make you universal. Yeah. It's really not. Those two things can coexist.
Yeah.
Got your first question.
I got a question. My daughter has trouble just going to school. Any ideas to help me get her there? It's special ed, small class size. She has a friend there.
It's a big question.
Well, first you have to figure out why she doesn't want to go to school, because you can't really do anything without addressing the why. Because if it's like a small thing, like, well, I don't like doing this one thing in class, then that's an easy fix. But if it's like a whole anxiety around school, then that's a whole nother issue. That if you move her out of the school into a new school, you'll probably just find another issue why she doesn't want to go to school. So you gotta figure out the why. And something we talked about last week is, does she have the capacity to go to school and to learn and to make friends and do all that? If she doesn't have the capacity, you gotta make sure she's in a place where she has that capacity. And one of the biggest things for me was when I was afraid of like I might be overwhelmed at school is when I call my mom knowing that she's gonna pick me up. When she was like, why don't you try and stay one more hour? Or why don't you just finish out the day? There's not much left. Then the next morning I would be like, well, I don't want a chance going to school and having to stick it out. If when she was there and picked me up, then the next day I would be more willing to go to school and to try to make it through the day. And so knowing I had that safety net, I would actually, when I called her the first time, it was like, I want to go home. And she didn't fight me. Like, I was ready for this whole fight of explanation and being like, I need to. And she's like, okay, I'll be there. Suddenly I was like, do I really want to go home now? And I started questioning that. And I went to school more. It could just be a small thing like that. Without knowing the why, it could be.
I don't have my glasses, so I don't know if this is a mom or a dad.
Yeah, Kat Jennings, so I think.
Well, I would just say, I completely love your advice, and if this were my student and a parent were coming to me right now, I would say tonight, sit down, make a list, as Chloe said, to get to the whys, make a list, just ask her to make a list of the 10 worst things about school, and she'll do so probably happily and fervently, and stress how awful they are. Maybe there'll be more than 10, and the only reason I would limit to 10 is then surprises, say, okay, now make a list of things that you like about it, and then really try to accentuate whatever positive she can come up with, even if it's, I like a tree in the corner, or I like the sandwiches in a machine or something. Really try to accentuate that and have her invest in whatever positive she's able to come up with. And then therapeutically, you can lessen or address the importance of the negatives. The lists are good.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Just make sure that she's comfortable in the morning, and it starts off with a good mindset, because if you just force her into going to school with a negative mindset, you're just going to get a negative outcome. She's not going to want to be there, and she's going to stay looking at the negative. So if she goes in a more comfortable place, she'll probably find more positives and hold on to those.
I completely agree. One of my oft repeated phrases is, a happy child is a child who's going to learn. And if she's not wanting to go to school, there's something that's not making her happy. So your first priority is to find a way for her to be happy, and then she'll engage in the process. It's not hard to make kids happy. I think it's a natural state. You just got to find out how to do it.
Yeah. And I think also having somewhere on campus to go, like your classroom,
or an SC.
or that you can go to when you're overwhelmed with class, but think you can recuperate at school and not necessarily have to go home. That's an important thing. So if she doesn't have that, maybe talk to the librarian if she can hang out in the library, or find a teacher she really likes, and she could go sit in their classroom in the back of the room or something, if she needs that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's something really important.
In the library, what a great. If they have a library there's no place better than a library on a school campus.
In elementary school, is the nurse's office.
Was it?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. What was the nurse's name?
I hope that was the nurse's name.
Billy?
Miss Billy.
Miss Billy.
Or Nurse Billy.
Nurse Billy.
It happened because I was afraid of the automatic flushing toilets, and I had an accident a few times, and she was like, use this bathroom, it doesn't have that. And so I would, so I would, even when I was all the way across the school, I would go there. And then we started just talking. And so if I wasn't having, if I wasn't able to be in class, I'd be like, I have a stomachache. I go to the nurse's
That's
office,
great.
and I
love
took
that.
a nap in there. And she was really cool.
We should
And she
find
got it. She understood what I was doing. And she's like, you can hang out here as long as you need to. And she'd come over like every once in a while and be like, okay, you ready to go back to class now? I'm like, yeah,
That's
I'm
great.
ready.
I want to find her. We need to write her and say how terrific she was.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Trying to think. I mean, I had lots of travails too. And I didn't have a nurse's office or a safe place. I wish I had come up with all these tricks when I was young, because that would have served me well too.
And then it was your classroom, I want to say your school, and then it was the learning center when I was at the public school. I didn't have one at the middle school before. That's why it wasn't
That's
working.
why it wasn't going well. Wish I had one.
All right, we'll start wrapping up. If you have any final questions, I'd love to answer them.
I got my glasses.
Thank you for being a
Should I
guest.
be reading it?
Thank you
There's
for being a guest this week. Is there anything you want to
Say,
say?
thank you for having me. Like I'm on Merv Griffin. No, just it was an honor, and you said some incredibly kind and sweet things, and I take that when you say those things to me, and when you say those things to people who have been involved in your life, when young people share that, I have no idea what a triumph that is for an educator or a therapist to hear that feedback, and it's incredibly important to me, and I am more appreciative than you know. Thank you.
All right, guys, remember to check out the OurTism website. We have the parent support group, too long, the first one, so please come in Redondo Beach. Next week we'll have the adult support group for people with Asperger profiles and similar special needs. Check out Life Map. I have articles on the website, and we have social groups. Thank you for watching this week. I'll be back next Wednesday, and our guest will be Ella London, and we'll be talking about color therapy.
You're saying in the weeks to come, you're going to try to find that nurse and bring her on.
Stay colorful. Bye.